everyone. My name is Jake James, but I prefer JJ. I'm writing to you here today because I think I'm going to die, and I need your advice on what to do. I believe my childhood imaginary friend will end my life soon. This all started way back in the early 2000s. I was 5 or 6 years old when I started a friendship with my imaginary friend, Mick. Mick was my very best friend when I was little, as my family lived in a small 2-bedroom shack in Louisiana, deep in the woods. My mother was a teacher way back in the day, but she quit when she got pregnant with my older brother Stan. My father was a deckhand on a shrimp boat, and he was gone a lot of the time with work. My mother homeschooled us, which meant we didn't have much of a chance in making friends, so my brother was all that I had. That is, until the day I met Mick. Mick was a small boy just as I was, and he had shaggy, light blonde hair and wore a bright yellow shirt with jean shorts and white sneakers. I was the only one that could see Mick, and he was always at my side. We would play all of our fun made-up games from sun-up to sundown. We threw rocks that skipped across the glass-like water surface at the river, and had make-believe sword fights with sticks we found in the woods. I recall having conversations with Mick all the time. We were sitting on a few big rocks near the river when Mick asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "I think I want to be a pilot someday," I responded gleefully. I looked over at Mick and asked him the same question. "I just hope I'm still your bestest friend when I grow up," Mick responded, shooting me a look with an almost too wide smile. "Me too, Mick, me too," I responded before giving him a slight slap on the back and yelling, "Kid Tag, you're it!" and running through the swampy woods that surrounded our house. My mother was an angel, but was always strict when she spoke to me about Mick, telling me, "Listen, hon, I understand that things can get lonely out here, but you need to stay focused on reality. Mick is not a real boy, and you need to stop pretending that he is." The words my mother spoke were harsh, but they only bothered me a little bit. Mick, however, was always very upset when he overheard them. He would yell and slam his fist into the ground before saying, "I am real," and "Your mom is just a stupid grown-up. She doesn't even remember what it was like to be a kid." His actions made me feel uneasy and nervous, but Mick would always calm himself down and apologize for his outbursts when he had seen my reaction. One day, my brother Stan and I were in the woods playing in the tree fort that we had put together with some old pallets and fallen logs we found. We were pretending to be soldiers, fighting off bad guys at every angle with large sticks as RPGs and smaller sticks as rifles. We had just finished up acting out the brave scene full of heroics when a blood-curdling scream boomed across the woods and bounced between the soggy tree stumps. Stan and I were frozen in shock at the sound that filled our little fort with terror. We heard it again. This time, the scream was followed with the voice of our mother begging for her life. In a dread-filled voice, she screamed, "Who are you? No, you're not real. Get out of my house." It is still impossible to this day to express the feelings that whirled through my veins and up into the tears that involuntarily began careening down my face. Stan was only 5 years older than me, but he was a much braver kid than I was. He sprung into action at the sound of the second scream. "JJ, I need you to run to the neighbors and tell them something bad is happening and you need the cops, okay?" Stan said while holding my shoulders and demanding my attention. What's wrong with Mommy?" I shrieked from within my shivering body. "Something bad, Jay. You need to go now," Stan shouted as he turned me in the direction of the neighbors, pointed, and gave me a small shove before he took off running in the direction of our house. I froze there, watching my brother disappear and then reappear amongst the trees before ultimately leaving my sight altogether. I finally found the courage to unbind my feet from their resting spots and ran in the direction I believed Stan had pointed me in. My feet felt like I was carrying large stones around my ankles, and my back muscles hurt from how hard I was trying to move my little legs. The smell of rotting wood and musty fungus filled my lungs as I climbed onto and over fallen moss-covered logs. The muck from the floor of the woods clung to my white shoes, as though it were hands reaching out to stop me on my mission. I took several missteps and fell a few times on my way, cutting my arms and scraping my knees. At one point, I recall looking over to my side and seeing Mick standing there amongst the trees, watching me attempt to stand back up from a hard fall. I remember thinking about the fact that my best friend wasn't offering me help in any way. The run felt like an eternity, but I finally made it to my neighbor's home. Passing the edge of the tree line, I could see an older man in blue overalls sitting in his rocking chair on his front porch. He had a guitar in his hands, and there was an old dog laying at his feet. Help! Something bad happened to Mommy!" I screamed at the old man, who quickly set his guitar aside and flew from his chair to meet me in the driveway. Having been so exhausted from the long run, I fell to my knees just before he reached me, and I remember the feeling of the large gravel rocks slicing through the skin. I wanted to yell out in pain, but failed to do so. Falling tears and gasps for air in my burning lungs was all I could muster. The old man embraced me and lifted me to my feet, demanding answers and retrieving his phone from his overall pocket. That is when I looked back into the tree line, and my eyes studied the woods, darting from tree to tree and finally coming to rest on a sight that still chills me as I write this. There, standing in the swampy woods, was my best friend Mick. Our eyes met, and the realization struck me like a truck. Mick was standing there smiling. A wide, stretching row of sharp teeth was uncovered from beneath his pale lips. The police arrived at our small shack to the sight of true horror. My mother had been dealt a gruesome death. Her body had been ripped to shreds, and her tongue had been ripped from her mouth. I read the autopsy report when I was a teen, and it was said to have been bitten off or cut with a jagged object, and that her tongue was not located at the scene. That day was unbelievably difficult to manage. I remembered that day as the one in which I lost my mother and my very best friend. My father had to quit his job on the boats and return home. He was different than I remembered. After my mom died, he was harsh and bitter all the time. He began drinking and doing drugs with what small amount of money he could bring in. He struggled to put food on the table and keep even the small shack as a place for us to live. It was a harsh few years that we spent living that way. My father became physically abusive and began slapping my brother and me when he was angry. I can still feel the welts he left on my face as I type this out. When I was 10 years old, Stan ran away. He left me a small note under my pillow and told me where to find him when I left someday. I awoke that morning to the sound of my father throwing things around the house and swearing. I could feel the slams of his feet through my small wire-framed bed as he stomped. He swung open my door and in a deep, bitter tone he said, "Living room now," and slammed the door behind him. Climbing out of bed and walking past my door, I was met with the smell of alcohol so strong that it burned my eyes. It wafted around the room, clinging to the air, and the sights of upturned furniture and shattered glass came into view. "Where is your brother, you little shit? You tell me right now," he exclaimed from the opposite side of the living room. He was sitting sprawled on top of our old couch. I don't know. Maybe he went to school, or maybe he... My fumbling words were cut off by his sudden jolt from the couch and into the few stale inches of space between my face and my words. Maybe isn't good enough, JJ. Use your brain, he said in a hateful manner. The alcohol that slid off of his words and flew into my nose disgusted me, and I turned my head away to flee them. My dad grabbed the collar of my small shirt and yanked me back to him, causing a small tearing sound in my shirt. "Do not fucking turn away from me," he said. "Yes, sir," I managed to mutter through my shaking lips and tears. "I don't know where he went, I promise." A look of disgust slid to his face, and he spat. "Well, what the fuck good are you then?" Before throwing my collar from his hand and returning to the couch. Life for me became almost unbearable now. I was left there to face all of his rage and abuse alone. I had to face what I thought at the time were the darkest days of my life, now without my mom, my brother, and Mick. After my mother died, Stan and I were enrolled in a crappy public school that we both hated. We missed the days of our mother waking us up with her beautiful singing and the smell of a warm breakfast lingering in the air. We missed her history lessons, where she sat and read fantastic stories of places far away. We missed her kind words and warm embrace when things were bad. And now, I was there, missing all of that alone. I missed my brother with all my heart, but I was hopeful he had a safe place to be away from this hell. I began drawing pictures of Mick again, hiding them under my bed from my father, and thinking about how fun life used to be when we pretended to be swashbuckling pirates or safari explorers searching for gold. I missed having a companion and someone to talk to. As I slept at night, I prayed for his return, and I begged whatever God may be listening to bring my wish to life. I spent another 2 long years in that house with my father. One day, while walking home down our long driveway surrounded by trees, I looked up from my feet, and the sight I found had stopped me in my tracks. Peering between the low-hanging branches of a tree stood Mick. His once shaggy light blonde hair was now significantly more disheveled and dirty. His small yellow shirt was now stained with dark brown splotches and stretched taut over his pale, greasy skin. His once bright white shoes were untied and now stained dark brown as if they had been buried in the ground, and his denim shorts were unbuttoned to make room for his now bigger stomach. The vision of my once well-kept friend, now dirt-covered and disheveled, was off-putting and honestly quite scary, but the thoughts were quickly washed away with the overwhelming sense of joy I felt at the return of my friend. I raced over to him and embraced him, saying, "Mick, I missed you so much." Feeling him return the hug allowed a warm feeling to rise within my chest. Even with his cold arms, I felt warm for the first time in a long time. "I missed you too, kiddo," he returned. "Where have you been all this time? I needed you, but you were gone," I shouted at him. In his newly found cold demeanor, he responded, "I was playing with some others for a while, but I'm back now." "Others?" I questioned, feeling very confused. "Yes, JJ, others. But you know, you have always been my favorite. After all, you're my best friend, right?" Mick returned, now allowing that unusually long, jagged smile to crawl across his face. "Yeah, of course, Mick. So much has happened. I need to tell you about it," I screeched in a failed attempt to hold my excitement of his return at bay. Mick and I walked down the long driveway as I began verbally assaulting his ears with topics that he seemed to pay hardly any mind to. Mick was different from the earlier years of my childhood, but I didn't care. Anything was better than being stuck alone here in the woods with just my dad. Mick seemed older somehow, and far less interested in the kid-like topics that sprung from my still young mind. He was quick to dismiss simple, fun-based ideas, and seemed to be far more interested in the topic of my dad and brother. "Where's Danny boy at?" he asked in a slightly off-putting tone before pausing his strides and sliding his eyes to gaze at me. Coming to an abrupt stop beside him, I responded while peering down to my feet anxiously. "He ran away. My dad isn't nice anymore." "Your father is a worthless junkie." Mick spat into the air with disgust before continuing with, "Stanny boy we can deal with later." The statement confused me greatly. Deal with? I thought internally before asking Mick what he meant by that. Scoffing at the question with enough annoyance in his voice to make me feel uneasy that I had said something wrong, he continued with, "Where's the prick at now? Passed out in the gutter somewhere?" I allowed my eyes to travel to Mick's in question. "Your father, JJ, come on, use your brain," he exclaimed in a hateful manner. The words stung like venom and reminded me of my father. I felt a wash of serious discomfort start to walk its way up my spine and into my consciousness before I answered. "I don't know, I'm just getting home. He might be at his friend's house." I could see the wash of annoyance slide across his face at my response. He shook his head slightly before continuing on the walk back to the house. I was starting to regret my dear friend's long-awaited return. I was starting to doubt that my friend had come back at all, until Mick seemed to shake off the anger and asked me to play one of my favorite games from when I was younger. "Hey, JJ, you remember tree tag?" he asked in what I now know was a fabricated act of excitement. "Duh, I made that game, remember?" I asked excitedly at the new prospect of the conversation. "That really was a winner. You were always beating me at that one. We definitely have to play that again sometime." He once again forced excitement through his brown teeth in his reply. Having still not noticed his facade at this point, I grew happy and began smiling at the idea of playing my favorite game again. It had been years since I had made up those rules and taught Mick how to play. The rules were simple. One person has to go and put their head against a tree and count to whatever number you agree on, while the other climbs the tree. Once the tagger reaches the number, they begin climbing the tree behind the runner, trying to tag them. Not the most impressive game, but still I was very proud of it. Mick and I had spent what felt like days of my youth chasing each other amongst the branches. We finally made our way back to the shack and sat in my room for a while, allowing only a few brief minutes of silence to pass before I once again began questioning Mick of his whereabouts. "Hey, Mick," I asked sheepishly. "Yeah," he responded. "Why did you leave me when the bad thing happened to my mom?" I asked. Mick turned to me, letting out a deep huff before responding coldly. "Had shit to do, JJ. I can't fucking be everywhere all the time." I was surprised at the sound of him cussing, and that stuck with me. Mick was always trying to teach me how to be polite and how to be nice. He always said that swear words hurt others, and he was right. Hearing them flow from his mouth so easily was off-putting for my young mind. Seeing my visual wincing, Mick tried to lighten the mood with a fake peppy. "When does Dad get home, kiddo?" I'm not sure. He kinda just comes and goes. I know that he will be home tonight for sure, though. He never misses TV at night," I responded. Hoping to forget the topic and move on to something else, I quickly followed up with, Where have you been since you left? Snapping at me, he shouted, You ask too many fucking. I swear I could see his eyes flicker from a pale, drained gray to bright red, and back again as his words stabbed at my ears. He paused and chuckled before responding in that, once again, fake, happy tone. Sorry, buddy. I didn't mean to get angry. I'm just a little tired and very hungry. I had to travel a very long way to get here today, and it was a very rough trip. He then patted me on the top of the head and continued with, I have been all over the world, traveling from place to place, helping other kids that need it. Oh, I said, still hearing my heart beating in my ears from the outburst. Looking down at my feet that dangled off the bed, I felt my eyes start to get warm and leak. I remember feeling so entirely defeated and crushed that Mick was being mean to me. I remember feeling the pit in my stomach and heat in my face begin to rise. Mick placed a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder and pulled me into a half-hearted, one-armed hug. I'm sorry, JJ, I'm just cranky and so hungry, he said, softly this time. Hearing the words, I pulled away from Mick and said, We have some food if you want it. Dad brought home some food earlier this morning. I think we have some crackers or, maybe an apple. Mick laughed at the words, followed by, Oh, that's real nice of you, JJ. But you know I don't eat the same things you do, silly. The horrifying words didn't carry the weight that they do now as I'm writing this. Mick followed his words with, Hey, buddy, I'm going to take a little stroll into town for a bite to eat. Why don't you stick around here and we can catch up more when I get back later? Deal? Deal, I responded as Mick shot up from the bed and was practically running out of the shack before even the weight of his words had drifted to the musty wooden floor beneath our feet. Later that night, my dad returned home. I made the mistake of running to greet him at the door, thinking it was my friend returning. As the door swung open, my world was once again enveloped in the burning smell of alcohol and cigarette smoke. Why the fuck are you so giddy, boy? My dad asked as he flicked the ash from his cigarette onto the floor and kicked the door shut with his muddy boot. I am just excited that you're home is all, I replied, trying to hide the ridiculous lie as best as a young boy could. Chuckling sarcastically, he responded with, Well, that makes one of us, before swiping some cans out of the way and throwing himself on the couch, flicking on the remote. Sadly, these words no longer bore any form of weight against me, as they had all taken their toll years ago. In fact, I don't believe there are any combinations of words someone could say to get a rise out of me anymore. I've heard them all. Hey, Dad, what's for dinner? I asked as my words floated through the smog of tobacco smoke in the air. I got something when I was out today. Guess you gotta figure it out for yourself. I got some shows to catch, he said while peering right through me and into the bulbous screen of the old TV. Okay, I said, before shuffling my way across the wooden floor to the dirty kitchen, looking to satiate my growing hunger. Standing on the tips of my toes, I was reaching for some unlabeled can of who knows what high up on a shelf when it all came crashing down. Literally and figuratively. The shelf made a tremendous crashing noise as it fell to the ground, narrowly missing the tips of my small feet. I barely had time to look up before my father was there, eye level with me. His breath burned like ether in my nostrils, and the stench of the cigarettes radiating from his clothes mixed, concocting a bile-inducing smell. I'm sore, was all I was able to muster before he raised his hand and slapped the smell from my nose. You stupid son of a bitch, he yelled as he picked up the shelf and slammed it back into its place before turning back to me. How many times have I told you to pay attention to what you're doing? Huh? How many fucking times, JJ? Rivers of tears poured from my face as the feeling returned to my cheek, and the warm, burning began to grow. "Ah, fuck," he shouted as he brushed past me and returned to the couch. There was a small plume of smoke rising from in between its cushions. The cigarette had fallen from his hand and in between the cushions. That's what had started the large fire that had taken my father's life. At least, that's what the headlines read after it all happened. The police officer that arrived on scene wrote it word for word in his notepad as he asked me what had happened that night. However, the truth was far more sinister than that. The night my father died was in many ways the best night of my life, and in others, the worst day of my life. Shortly after the shelf had fallen from its place, Mick had returned and was watching the events unfold from outside the shack through a broken window. He witnessed my dad raise his hand and hit me. He had watched my father run to the couch and put out the fire between the cushions. Witnessing these sights must have sparked a dark and twisted idea in his mind. I fled the shack as my father fought the small fire, jumping from the top step and onto the cold and sharp gravel driveway. I began running painfully across the muddy rocks and into the woods. Coming to a stop at the base of a massive tree with several low-hanging branches, I fell into a ball of pain and anguish, allowing my sweaty head to fall into my palms. I wept into my lap for a short time, until I heard Mick speak softly to me. "Hey, JJ." The tone was a mix between pushy and fraudulently happy. "I know that your dad's not being very good to you right now, but hey, let's play tree tag. I'm sure that would cheer you up." I muttered, "No, I don't want to," between the deep, uncontrolled breaths. "Come on, JJ," he pushed in a lute, authoritarian voice, while grabbing me by the arm and lifting me to my feet. "You climb first and I'll count," he suggested, while leaving absolutely no room for argument. Before I knew it, I had grabbed onto a low-hanging thick branch and pulled my feet up off the ground. I took a moment to wipe the remaining tears from my eyes and wiped my running nose on my stained t-shirt. I remember being so unbelievably confused as to why Mick was making me play this game right now. Of all the times he chose right now, it's all completely clear now. I flew up the tree with reckless abandon, trying my best to get as high as possible before Mick started his part of the game. I was almost all the way to the top of the tree before I realized I couldn't hear Mick counting. I shouted down to the now out-of-sight forest floor, "You have to count, Mick." There was no response at all. The only noise that accompanied me up here was that of my labored breathing and a faint breeze blowing through the branches. I actually smelled it before I noticed it with my eyes. A large stack of black smoke began to drift above some of the smaller trees around. Then I heard the yells of my father, the likes of those that still haunt my dreams. He was yelling at Mick. My heart raced as I witnessed the altercation with just my ears. "Who the fuck are you? Get out now!" The slurred screams of my father echoed through the treetops as my heart began pounding within my ribcage. I began my descent from the treetop as fast as my exhausted body could muster, but by the time I reached the ground, the flames were already shooting out the sides and from between every crack that existed in the walls of the shack. I resigned myself to becoming nothing more than an onlooking bystander to the destruction of what little I had left in this world. I could still hear the commotion from within its flame-scorched walls as my father and Mick came to blows. The sound of ripping flesh and splintering bones could be heard rebounding off the trees and boulders that surround. I slumped to the ground in dismay. After what felt like hours, I suddenly felt a cold, waxy hand grab the back of my arm and hoist me to my feet. Wow, those cigarettes really do kill. He spat through a short burst of deranged laughter before letting a demonic-like jagged smile crawl onto his bloody face. Boy, am I stuffed, he muttered, slapping his greasy gut with his bloody hands. Here's what you're going to tell the cops, JJ, he said, as he put a jarred arm around my shoulder and leaned into me. My dad was drunk and smoking on the couch when I went to bed. He was watching TV like he always does. I don't know what happened. Got it? Mick shot me a wild look, awaiting my response. Got it, I said weakly in response to his demands. Good. Good. Now look, I gotta go away for a while, but you will be seeing more of me. I guarantee that. He wiped the rapid foam that had pooled along the edges of his mouth while waiting for my response. Okay, I responded plainly as I stared in what was certainly shock at the scene that lay blazing in front of me. My mind traced the consuming flames and found the faces of my family etched in its glow. One by one, I found resemblance to my beautiful mother, my brave brother, and my bastard father, just as my emotions began to finally boil over and snap me from my almost drunken stupor. I saw him. Mick was there amongst the flames, standing proud and unmoving as its immense heat turned his clothing to ashes around him. His eyes were splattered a deep, bright red color, and his stiff smile was lined with his jagged, rotten teeth. I swear I saw a pair of horns upon his head. I spent the next few years of my childhood bouncing from foster home to foster home. I was always in trouble in school, as I never had any form of interest in the bleak subjects they taught. My life was similar to that of a ship lost at sea, caught in a whirlwind of self-loathing and despair. A ship which I was just a passenger holding on to the rail for dear life. I often found myself awake, staring at the white ceiling in my room, attempting to make out figures amongst the popcorn-textured ceiling. Most of the time, I would find the faces of Stan or my mom, but sometimes I would find the rough, hazy eyes of my father, peering cold lasers at me in the night. On the worst nights, I would find the jagged rows of Mick's teeth and his blood-red eyes staring back at me. Those nightmare-like images tattooed the inside of my eyelids, even after I closed them in a vain attempt to wash them from my mind. I spent countless hours sitting in a designer chair in a cushy office, surrounded by calming symbols and potted plants, listening to my therapist's attempts to prove my delusion. Unfortunately, the outcome of these long sessions would only stand to prove my nightmares were real. The police had dropped the investigation long ago, but this man always seemed to put on his best Sherlock impression, along with his attempts to persuade the truth of that night out into the room. JJ, you know by now that you can confide in me, he said, while scribbling some useless notes in his yellow notepad. Yup, I responded in annoyed submission. Well then, maybe it's time you really open up to me, Jake. We have been talking for years, and I think you deserve to be released from this stress on your life, he said. I know for a fact if he had seen the consequences of his prying words flowing towards him like a deep, dark river, he would have stopped. I wish he did stop. I wish he would have just asked me about something else. Anything else. Sorry, y'all, I have to cut it off here for now. The librarian is closing up for the night and kicking everyone out. I promise to update you as soon as I can. Hey everyone, JJ here. I found a little internet cafe, so we are good to go. His prying words led to the next interaction with my childhood nightmares. And honestly, as sad as I may sound, I'm still relieved to be done with those therapy sessions. Our final session came just 3 days after my 17th birthday. I was feeling disgusted with the way my life was playing out in front of me, like a terrible movie in a theater that I hadn't asked to attend. I quite frankly had come to a crossroads in my life. If he was going to pry open the door, then I was going to kick that door open for him and lay it all out on the coffee table of his expensive office. I began laying out every intricate detail of my childhood and all the fucked up things that I had been subjected to. Well, I'm sorry that you have lived through so much trauma, Jake. It's very obvious you have lived through as much as 10 others, he said in what felt like mocking sympathy. So did they ever find the person who murdered your mother? He pressed. Mick killed my mother, I responded bitterly. Letting out a sigh before responding, he said, Mick is a fabrication of your mind, Jake. He is a safety blanket that your subconscious mind developed to help shield you from the scary things as a kid. His words poured gasoline on an already burning ember from deep within my mind. I felt the venom burn the tip of my tongue as I laid into him with hate-fueled rage. Safety blanket. A fucking safety blanket. That godforsaken monster killed my parents. He stole every single drop of innocence from my childhood. He murdered my mother. He ate her fucking tongue and slashed her throat open. He murdered my father and ate his fucking hands. I noticed little bits of spit flying through the air on the back of my bitter words. The look I was given in return to my onslaught proved to jolt me back into this realm. I let out a large breath before collecting myself and saying, He murdered me, handing me a wad of tissue to soak up the trail of tears I hadn't noticed falling from my chin. He fixed his tie nervously before saying, Jake, I'm sorry to upset you like this, but you need to know this is how the heart and mind heal. There are many ways of coping with the distress, and the mind will always choose one way or another to heal. His manufactured words carried with them only more fuel to piss me off. I felt as though I finally gave him what he was asking for the past several years, and I was brushed aside. Today was a great step in the right direction, but I think it's time to be aggressively honest, Jake. It's time you step out of the realm of make-believe and live here with all of the rest of us in the real world. Sure, maybe next time, I said, before standing from the chair and turning towards the door. Just as my hand wrapped around the handle, I heard those sharp words crawl up my spine and into my ears. Hiya, JJ. Long time no see. My world was filled with more emotions than I can describe. I felt fear creep across the back of my neck as the hair stood at attention. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I was prepared for flight. Hey, you can't be in here. These sessions are private. You need to leave or I'll call security. My therapist muttered in fear and disbelief at the image standing there between us. Letting out a shaking breath, I turned around and met eyes with my walking nightmare. There, about 5 feet to the right on my chair, stood Mick. This time Mick's body was bigger and more bloated than before. Large, deep scarring stretch marks were bulging across his skin like lines on a map. The once vibrant-looking skin was waxy and pale. His jarred childhood clothing hardly clung to life over his disgusting, bloated body. My eyes rose to his facial features. His endless rows of teeth were there as always. I recall staring at them and thinking about how those had been the same teeth that brought rad ends to my parents. What the fuck are you doing here, Mick? I asked, trying to hide my shaking bones. "Oh, you know, just out for a bite," he hissed between his clenched teeth, stuck in a sharp, wide smile. "Mick?" asked my therapist while peering at me in horror before jumping to his feet and fleeing for the door. I watched as Mick's eyes flicked from the glassy gray to bright red. The light in the room was sapped from my eyes as I felt a liquid warmth wash over my face and arms. Mick had attacked the poor man with unbelievable speed, and to this day, I'm thankful that at the very least it was instant. This was the first time I had witnessed in first person the cruel depravity of my once best friend. The pure lack of all humanity struck my brain like lightning and shoved me into a state of confusion, followed by immense fear. I lifted my shirt and smeared my eyes clear. The sounds of my slamming heartbeat boomed through my eardrums, and the feeling of swallowing a 50 kg weight hit the bottom of my stomach in step. Mick's eyes flicked once again from hellfire red to sluggish gray. He raised his finger out in front of his chewing mouth as to tell me to be quiet, and then vanished in an instant, leaving behind him only the partially scorched floorboards where his feet had been planted. While his physical image had left the now stained office, the image of his disgusting figure never left my mind. Having heard the commotion, the secretary rushed into the room, almost knocking me over in the process, and screaming so loud you would have thought she tore her vocal cords. I just stood there in shock, staring at the crater in the top of the poor man's head. According to the police report, an unknown assailant had entered the therapy center and attacked the unsuspecting therapist mid-session before making an unexplainable escape from the scene, and I never even attempted to correct them. I was, of course, taken into custody by the police. They made sure to rough me up and interrogate the hell out of me. Given my long list of petty crimes and run-ins with the law in the past, they made the assumption that I was involved, and honestly, they were correct, just not in the way they would ever believe. My saving grace came when the security camera footage was reviewed. They never let me see it, and honestly, I was relieved. The last thing I wanted to do was watch that horrible act again. Watching it in person, feeling the warm innards of another human being splattered across my face, and facing the horrid reality of someone's demise stuck with me more than anything else. The most chilling part was reading the autopsy report. I swiped it off the desk of a detective that was interviewing me. Reading the report, I found that his brain had been missing. Missing, not damaged beyond recognition, but gone. Mick had smashed the poor man's skull open like a fucking coconut and siphoned his brain from its resting spot. The words dug the pit in my stomach to an even deeper level. After the police investigation ruled me out as a suspect, I began attempting to reach out to Stan again. My attempts in earlier years had been fruitless. Stan had obviously bounced from place to place after leaving home with nothing more than the shirt on his back and the musty smell of cigarettes and dirt clinging to his hair. I dreamed about my brother and where he may be all the time. I recall having fantastic dreams as a child that he was off somewhere living out the childish dreams we once fantasized about. Maybe he was riding elephants in the jungle looking for treasure, or maybe he had joined a ragtag group of mercenaries in a distant land, fighting to free the local people from their oppressive overlords. The imagination of a child never runs out of space, no matter the box life may put around it. As I grew older into my later teenage years, I started daydreaming things much more realistic. I hoped that Stan was alive. I dreamed that he may have found a safe place to live and maybe settled down somewhere with a nice girl. I hoped with every part of my being that he made it out of the deep, swampy woods we lived in I found Stan hardly living what one would call a life. He was holed up in a crack den on the south side of the city. He was sharing the third bedroom of a partially burned-out house with two other drug-riddled human beings. Large groups of track marks sprawled across the now brown veins on his emaciated arms. His teeth had almost rotted completely from his mouth, his once childish features now replaced with rapidly aged creases and scars. I tried like hell to save my brother. I tried with all that I had to stop his addictions. I tried to talk him down off of that dark balcony floating above the world, but I failed. The hard-learned lessons of my life continued, and this lesson taught me that you can't save someone that doesn't want to be saved. No matter how much you love them, no matter how much you need them. Stan succumbed to his addictions only 4 short months after I found him. He was on a heroin-fueled bender somewhere on the west side when he took a fall from a 6th-story window, crashing through the fire escape floor before landing on the sidewalk lifeless. His funeral, if you could call it a funeral, consisted of 3 people. Me, a priest, and my dead brother. I took his urn to the church and held it while the priest said a few prayers over him. I thought of taking his ashes to the very swamp that we used to play together in as children, but how cruel would that have been? Stan fought for his life to leave that place, and it was in no way my right to return him there. The next few years of my life whisked away in a blink, each day as forgettable as the next. I fought my demons alone at night when I laid my head on my pillow. I would stare at my stained walls and watch the horrible events of the past play out once again in my mind. I found a meaningless job in a dumpy little corner store as a cook. The job itself was easy enough. Unwrapping frozen processed food and throwing it in an industrial oven doesn't take much skill. I contemplated leaving all the time but found that I had nowhere to go if I had. The small checks I earned were enough to pay for a room in a shared apartment a few blocks away. I lived that menial life for a while before my most recent meeting with Mick, and the reason I'm writing this now. Mick came to visit last week. He first appeared across the street from my job standing at the bus stop. I felt every hair on my body raise, and it felt as though they were on fire. He was somehow even more disfigured and bloated than previously. His large, bulging stomach hung down below his waist. What little was left of his disgusting, greasy blonde hair spilled down over his scarred body. The clothing he wore from my childhood had long since tattered and fallen from his body, now replaced by disfiguring scars and oozing wounds. He was almost completely unrecognizable to his old image, save for his demonic smile. I continued seeing Mick in every aspect of my life. I would see him in a window of a 2nd-story building while I made my way home, or I would catch a glimpse of his disgusting figure in the hallway of my apartment building. I begged whatever God would listen to free me from him. I said a prayer I wished would be answered. I fear that wish was heard, but not by those I wished to hear it. That brings us to last night. Mick showed up in my room to have one last chat. I was resting my eyes trying to listen to the soft sounds of rain lightly tapping across the windowsill of my room when I heard his heavy breathing. Stricken with fear, I found my mind and body fighting against each other, one trying to face the intruder, and the other seeking to hold perfectly still. The smell of something burnt and rotting hung thick in the air like a dense fog. I found the scent carried with it a gross, sweet taste that stuck to the roof of my mouth. Mick let out a small hissing gurgle before speaking to me in what sounded nothing like his old voice. He sounded as though he was struggling to breathe. "Hey, JJ, I know you're awake. I know everything." His words shot lightning out the ends of my feet and hands. The overwhelming fear struck my heart like a hammer. I finally turned to face him standing in the corner of my small room. Mick continued, "I know that your mother couldn't keep her words to herself, so I took them from her. I know your father couldn't keep his hands to himself, so I took them from him too." He smiled slightly and allowed his black tongue to slide across his rotting teeth. "I know that you should thank me for ending the thoughts of that annoying therapist of yours." He laughed at his own words. "I also know that your brother always wanted to fly high," letting out a small gurgling crackle before continuing. "And I gave him his wish." Mick shuffled his horrid form closer to my bed and leaned over the footboard, staining my sheets a dark moldy color with his scorched skin. "But you know what? There's one thing I don't know yet, JJ." His smile stretched to an impossibly wide size, exposing both sets of his razor-sharp teeth. The rancid breath that oozed out hit me like a rotten corpse. Staring down the dark pit of his throat, I watched as he spoke. "I don't know what you taste like yet." Just as his eyes flashed to that hellfire red color, my roommate came barreling in my door and flipped on the light. Mick was gone in an instant, leaving nothing more than the stench of decay and the stains on my bed. "What the fuck was that thing? I'm gonna call the cops," he said while turning and running for his room. I made my break for it. I grabbed what little would fit in my bag and darted for the apartment door. Catching a cab to downtown, I ended up at this little internet cafe on Main. I am borrowing one of their public-use laptops, and I have been sitting here writing this out all night. I just don't know what to do. I tried researching how to fight this. I tried other forums. Hell, I even called the priest that led Stan's service, but he wouldn't pick up. I can see Mick across the square sitting on a park bench waiting for me. The worker has told me twice now that I need to finish up what I am doing because they are closing. Soon, I will have to leave the cafe and walk out into the dark, rainy streets to play once again with my very best friend, Mick.